Alright, let's do a little Volkswagen video here today. Little differences in some carburetors, different types of rocker arms, different types of valve covers. Talk about some oil coolers and some different stuff. I had some questions. One of my buddy in the YouTube garage just purchased not one but 3 Volkswagens, cutworm, and he's trying to get them running. Now, I'm going to start this video by telling you right up front, cutworm, that you know I don't do what you're doing right now. But I will help you as much as I possibly can. If you want, you can pull that motor out of the car that you were cranking that looked pretty decent. Put it in your pick-em-up truck and bring it to me. And I will pull it apart and rebuild it while you're here. And you can take it back up there and have a proper motor. But if you just want to try to get it running, and you know, I can show you how stuff works, but you're not going to have the best of luck with that. So I know a lot of guys are good at, you know, pouring the Mr. Oil down in the cylinders and letting it sit and freeing the motor up, but I don't like to do that. I like to take it apart, see what I have, make sure that it's top notch, so whatever I have is protected. When you try to run something that's been sitting a lot of times, there might be the case where you might have had good parts that you could have serviced and freshened up, but because you forego that process and just try to make it run, it damages the engine and causes long-term problems. So I do not recommend that. But here's some carburetors. You had some carburetor questions. This is a 30 pick 3. And a 30 pick 3 is an early model carburetor. It's common on like a 1500 or an early 1600 up to like late 72. Then they came out with the 34 pick, which is, you know, this one's taken apart because I was rebuilding it and lost interest because it's, whoops, it's an aftermarket carburetor. So, but anyway, the difference between the 34 pick and the 30 pick is quite significant on the throttle blade there. You can see the difference. So basically it's like putting a restrictor plate on your 1600. And any kind of restriction on a Volkswagen's, you know, you're already restricting. You got 56 horsepower, brand new and shiny. And the more stuff we try to cheat and get away with, the less power we're going to make. So anyway, correct carburetor, the carburetors that most people have and adapt to that car. Now when you have a 33 or a 34 pick and you're going to go to a 30 pick, you're going to need this adapter, and that makes it bolt to a late model manifold. You see the difference there. There's the 30 pick without the adapter. You need the adapter because this surface here is quite a bit smaller. So what this does is it bolts on and it makes the flange surface larger so you can adapt it to the late model intake manifold. But it cuts down on the performance quite a bit. You can see this adapter plate is not a straight throw, and it's restrictive to say the least. However, these carburetors do run very smooth, and that's why people like them. Rebuilding a carburetor is probably not a really good idea, you know, because even when I rebuild them, a lot of times you'll run into a carburetor that just doesn't want to ever work again. Just depends on what's wrong with the carburetor, like all these. You know, they're all complete, and for one reason or another, they're in the cabinet. A lot of reason is because I like to take these off and put dual carburetors on. So, what I do have also is to show you the fuel cutoff or idle up valve, whatever you referred it to. What this does is it has a plunger in it there, and it's activated when you turn the car on. Now I have, when I worked at the Volkswagen shop, we'd get these in. These little babies are like 45 bucks. And when they quit working, if you can't get your hands on one, you can cut the plunger off and reinstall this and adjust the carburetor accordingly. Or you can just buy the plunger. They're available at different part houses. So that pretty much covers the carburetors, I think. I would encourage you to find the proper size carburetor and start there. If you have to use a small one, you're going to need that adapter, probably to make it fit your intake manifold. And I do have a carb kit here. If you give me your address, I can send you a carb kit. They don't come with a whole lot of stuff, and this is why I tell you, you're just not going to fix a whole lot of stuff with this. You get a needle and seat, a little measuring device to set the float level, a gasket, a little O-ring there for the side. You get an accelerator pump that's less than stellar. That's another problem. The replacement parts are so crappy that it's very disappointing to invest any time or money into one of these parts. It's almost ahead of the game just to go buy a brand new carburetor. It'll have the adapter on it. It'll set you back a little over $100. You can bolt it on and it'll run perfect. And I do that a lot for customers that have a single carburetor application. Instead of trying to rebuild the carburetor, charge them, an hour or two labor to rebuild it, take it off, put it on in the kit, and then not have it work. It's really not worth the effort. So we have a piston here with a set of rings on. This is just another one of my reasons I don't like to let stuff sit and then try to make it run. These rings, they're not really big. They get stuff in them and they'll seize up. When you try to crank the car, it'll stick. Score the cylinder, and you have different kinds of problems down the road because now you got a barrel that's all tore up because you wanted to crank the car that had been sitting. All the different metals laying together cause porosity and different kinds of corrosion start in there, and it's best to take it apart and just clean all that stuff out. On your spark plugs that you showed, all four of them looked like the motor was burning oil pretty badly. So that's a sign of it's probably time for a valve job. Here's your typical plug, what it looks like after it comes out of a motor if it's in decent running condition. Don't have any, got carbon on it. The electrode's clean, the center cone's clean, and it doesn't have that wet, oily look on it. The wet, oily look is usually, a death sentence. You got new plugs there, but on a Volkswagen, you want to probably exclusively run the Bosch or the NGK, depending on the cylinder head that you have. On the later model heads that you buy, it has a smaller thread, meaning the diameter of the thread is, instead of the old 12 or 14 millimeter, I can't remember what it is, this is considerably smaller, so it eliminates the cracking that happens around the spark plug. It allows them to put more material around the plug. I'll compare it here to an older plug side by side. This is a brand new Bosch plug here, and this is what you should be running, a Bosch. And the number on the Bosch, you should know it by heart, 7902 is the part number. And you can see the considerable thread difference size there. So it puts a lot more material around the plug. Volkswagens are prone to crack around the spark plug into the exhaust valve because of the heat. That is another thing when you don't service the motor and maintain the cylinder heads. It is very easy to drop a exhaust valve. What happens is they get fatigued from all the heat going by them and getting tight because people forget to adjust the valves, and it burns the valve. And if you adjust the valve, you can get a little bit of life out, but once you burn that seat or the valve surface, the motor's not going to run as good. It's not going to be sealed up. And the other problem is the stem gets exposed to a lot of exhaust heat and it makes it brittle, and that sucker will break off. They're Volkswagen original. You can get away with it for a while, but they do break. That's why Volkswagen adjusted their valve adjustment from 5 thousandths or 4 thousandths was the original factory specs to 6, because people were forgetting their valve adjustments and they were dropping valves and burning seats. And the valve adjustment's very critical. You have to adjust the valves on these motors. Here's a lifter out of one of them. They're a solid lifter motor. They're not hydraulic. They don't compensate for any kind of wear or cycling. And what I mean by cycling is, you have a steel camshaft, you have an aluminum push rod and a steel lifter, and there's tolerances there. This swells up and grows and reduces in size, cycles every time you run the motor. So the intervals are, every 3,000 miles you should adjust your valves, make sure that you have proper lash. That way you won't burn your seat, and you'll get much longer service out of your motor, and it'll run a lot better. A lot of the late model Volkswagens, when I say late model, I'm talking Brazilian bugs or a Mexican Beetle. They went to a hydraulic camshaft, and some of those have come over into the market here, but there's not a whole lot of them. People aren't really big fans of them. The other question you have is the rocker arms, and this is all the rocker arms for a Type 1. And here's the rocker arm with solid rocker shafts, and these have been adjusted. The side clearance has been set to eliminate the valve train noise. We've eliminated the wavy washers, the spring washers, to keep those from breaking. And this is what you need when you go to a higher lift cam and you add lift and spring pressure. You have to get rid of the stock rocker. Volkswagen rocker that I know of that has springs on it would be a bus motor like a Type 4 engine, and you don't have any of that stuff. This is your typical stock Volkswagen rocker. You'll have these clips, and also eliminate those with the rocker shaft kit. We put better shafts in a bolt and a washer, that way you don't have the chance of the clip coming out, which very rarely will ever come out. However, these little wavy washers will break, and that's the spring that you're used to seeing on an American car. They use a wavy washer, and that's what loads the rocker arm against the block. And they use a series of them. There's two flats and then the wavy in the center, and that's what gives the rocker some spring. We eliminate the springs when we do the solid rocker shafts, and we actually eliminate the VW rocker shaft completely. We put a solid spacer in the middle, and that's all stuff you would do with a performance motor. Your motor is pretty much stocked as far as I can tell, so you won't need that. These are two performance rockers. This is a typical roller rocker assembly. These are Potter rockers, roller rockers. This is more for a high performance application, and you'll notice that the adjusting screw is turned around on these. These have a cup on one end and adjusting nut on the other. And on these race rockers, the cup is the adjuster. So you eliminate the little nubby there. This is a Berg rocker. If you ever find these, grab as many as you can. These are worth like $1,000 used, maybe $750. They might have come down. Now the I don't know if they have or not. $700 to $1,000 is what those go for. These roller rockers are in the $500 range, 400 and something bucks. I haven't tried these. I just bought these, and we're going to put these on our 2110 that we're going to build together. So the other question you have is sheet metal, and we'll start with the valve covers. I wanted to cover head studs, so if you are going to take me up and bring me a motor to rebuild, I prefer a motor with the stretchy studs, the 8mm studs over the 10s for a stock application. We usually use the 10mm stud, and the drag racers or the early model cases had the 10mm stud screwed right into the aluminum case. Volkswagen went to the 8mm case saver stud is what they call it. This is supposed to stretch more with the motor, expand and contract like we were talking about, and it holds up better than the 10mm stud on the street, believe it or not. Even though the head's torqued to a not as tight yield, this stud actually will grow and contract and expand with the engine. The case will actually have an insert in it that this stud screws into, And that's the other benefit. They do make cases, the race cases, that have the inserts for the 10mm studs. Our 2110 will have the 10mm studs with the case inserts. But if you have a 8mm motor, bring that one. Your valve cover question was, this is the type valve cover you have now. It might not be an MP, but it's a valve cover that bolts to the rocker arm assembly. You have those nuts that are fastened to the top of your rocker arms. I never like to bolt anything to a rocker arm. I won't put these on a motor that I build. I have stacks of them, and I'm sure there's guys that have brought their motors that really aren't happy about me having stacks of these, but it's for your own benefit. These really aren't very good. They use this rubber gasket, and a lot of times this gasket gets compromised because it's not really good quality, and they end up leaking. And a lot of times I've seen that nut come loose and have the rocker arm fail. So the rocker arm's got a lot of work to do just on its own. You don't need to start bolting stuff to the rocker assembly. That's just how I feel about it. This is your standard Type 1 valve cover, and it's a metal valve cover. It uses a cork gasket, and Volkswagen designed this years ago, man. You can't hardly beat this. You know, if you're having any kind of problem, you can take 2 sets of valve cover gaskets, glue them together with some weather strip adhesive, let it dry overnight, install the gaskets in there. It'll tighten the valve cover up quite a bit, and it'll help the motor seal. It'll also, if your rocker arms are hitting the valve covers, will give you a little bit of space there, so you know you're not hitting the rocker on the valve cover in a high lift situation. If you replace those aluminum valve covers, you got to get a set of bails. If you might have some of these in your stuff, and they fasten onto the cylinder head, and I would recommend going back with the stock valve cover. The oil cooler, about running it beat up, I wouldn't recommend it. You know, a few fins smashed over is fine. I think these oil coolers are pretty cheap. I think they're like 49, 50 bucks. I don't know, don't quote me on the prices, but I don't sell them, I just buy them. I can check with the parts house for you. I don't like using used oil coolers because oil, you know, it gets just as crusty in here as you would see it in the valve cover area or any other area in a sludged up motor. So if somebody hasn't serviced their engine or done proper oil changes, this tends to get more and more full of stuff. And unless you have access to somewhere where you can soak these and really rot them out in some carb cleaner, you'd be surprised how much junk you can get out of here when you're trying to get this clean. And for $59, you really don't want to be taking a chance of compromising your bearings. So if you have to, use the smashed one. If you got, you know, 60 bucks or so, just go get you a new oil cooler. It'll come with the seals and everything. It's also a good idea to, if you're not going to replace the oil cooler and you're just going to run with it, you want to at least take it off and replace the seals. The oil cooler that you showed in your video is a doghouse cooler, so that means that it's a late model cooler. The early model coolers bolt right to the block, and they'll be a little smaller than this and usually painted black. However, this has a got my seal. Here's another one. Nope. Anyway, this is a different type. Let me grab the seal so we're not confusing you. Pick this up, slide back by the camera and try not to knock it over. Anyway, like I was saying, there's going to be 4 of these little rubber seals, and these get very hard after that sits around for a while. Again, heat cycles kill rubber parts, and this is a serviceable. You have to service this item. There's 2 seals here, and there's 2 seals on top of the motor. If you buy an oil seal kit, they will come with all the proper seals. This is for an early model cooler or 1500. You can see how small the passageway is. This is just using this for an example. But these need to be nice and pliable for this not to leak. And you might as well address that now while you have the while you have the fan housing off of it. The distributor you have in the one motor is an 09. I like to set those total advance. Once you get the motor running, you want to put the timing light on #1 cylinder, start the motor up, rev it up to about 3,200 RPM, and you should have about 30 degrees advanced timing. I don't like to take too much timing out of Volkswagens. You run the proper fuel in it, the high test fuel, and set the timing where it needs to be, and the motor will perform. You know, a lot of people don't realize you're starting with a 56 horsepower motor, and when you start taking the premium fuel away and start taking timing out of the engine, all that stuff is decreasing the horsepower. So if you want a 40 horse, you can do all those things. I don't recommend it. So let me show you the sheet metal out here I got laid out for you. I got to end this video because it's pretty long. And we're going to have to talk over the AC. That's right, boys. AC. It's warming up here. All right. Mr. Black. Alright, you gotta watch out, Mr. Black. I gotta show old Cutworm how to do this. So this would be your rear pan. A lot of people think when they stand behind the motor that's the front. This is actually the rear. There is a pan that goes behind this. It bolts to the motor. It's called a breastplate. I figured you'd be able to remember that, Cutworm. This is your front tin. This is very important. This goes by the firewall in between the motor and the transmission. You really need to have all this tin on a Volkswagen, because if you don't have that engine compartment sealed up, the heat from the exhaust comes up into the engine compartment and gets sucked into the fan and then blown over the oil cooler, and it just heats the motor up and it never cools properly. A lot of people think, you know, hey man, I'll take all that sheet metal off and I'll get a lot of air movement and we'll be fine. But as soon as you get stuck in traffic, or if you get on the interstate, it doesn't work that way. Believe me, you take the sheet metal off and it's a death sentence. This is an early model sheet metal. It's got no hole for the oil cooler. This is a doghouse style. It's got a little chute for your oil cooler spout that goes out the back there. The dumps the hot air out of the engine compartment. What's up, fatty? This is your cylinder tin. You need 2 of those. This is single port. A dual port would be much bigger there. This stuff's pretty available, all of it. This is the aftermarket fan housing. I don't recommend these. You can see this is brand new and it's in the do not use pile. The fins, all the directional fins inside this, you know, they're missing. They don't take the time to put the factory air vanes in there, and you got a bunch of air blowing around in there that never makes it over the cylinder heads like it's supposed to. So, you know, always try to get a factory air, at least the factory fan housing if you can. And I think that about covers it, Cutworm. If you got any more questions, let me know. I think you were referring to the one car you had is a 68. And I think it's not a 68, because if it was a 68 it would have a swing axle. This is an IRS tranny, which requires the CV joint to be bolted to it. And this is a swing axle over here, which would be in a 68 or earlier. 68, 67 and back will have a swing axle.